Be careful, Judge. The day I buy this courtroom, you're finished.
Judge Judy has spent over 25 years presiding over more than 20,000 cases. She has crushed entitled bullies, dismantled professional liars, and destroyed the arrogant for decades on national television. She has seen every variety of scammer and every breed of person who thought they could outsmart the system. But in all her legendary career, nothing prepared the courtroom for this specific Tuesday afternoon. This was the moment where extreme wealth didn't just talk, it tried to dictate the law. Walking through those courtroom doors is Arthur Sterling, a 58-year-old billionaire CEO of a global energy conglomerate. Arthur doesn't just walk, he marches with a sense of ownership over the very air he breathes. He is wearing a custom-tailored Savile Row suit that costs more than a middle-class family's annual income. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar glints under the studio lights, a silent but deafening declaration of untouchable status. Look closely at his face. Notice the way his chin is tilted just 5 degrees too high? That is the physiognomy of inherited power and practiced disdain. His eyes don't look at people, they look through them, as if the court staff and the public gallery are merely background noise in his billion-dollar life. To a man who controls a $4.2 billion empire, the world is a marketplace, and he believes that even justice has a price tag. He has zero respect for the bench, zero respect for the process, and absolute contempt for the small woman sitting behind that wooden podium. What Arthur Sterling didn't know was that the words about to spill from his mouth would trigger a catastrophic chain of events. The 8 seconds of stunned silence that followed his threat would literally break the internet. Within 48 hours, the clip exploded to 210 million views. The hashtag number #IllBuyThisCourtroom trended at #1 for 2 weeks straight. Arthur Sterling became the most scrutinized man in America overnight, a symbol of the delusional elite. But here is why this story is legendary. Arthur actually believed he could negotiate with a force of nature. He had no concept that Judge Judy isn't a mere TV personality. She doesn't answer to networks. She owns her production. She is the boss, the owner, the ultimate authority. When Arthur threatened to buy the courtroom, he wasn't just being arrogant, he was exhibiting a level of narcissistic delusion that would be studied by psychologists for years. Before I show you the exact moment Arthur Sterling triggers his own destruction, pay attention. What you are about to witness will restore your faith in the fact that no amount of money protects you when you cross the line from ego into madness. The secret Judge Judy is about to expose a financial fraud hidden for a decade, will make you realize why this man's empire didn't just crack, it vanished in under 2 minutes of the most savage judicial takedown ever recorded. While Arthur Sterling stood in the defendant's dock smelling of expensive cologne and arrogance, Elias Thorne sat in the plaintiff's chair, his weathered hands trembling as he held a tattered folder. Elias is 68 years old, a man whose face is a roadmap of 40 years of honest, backbreaking labor. He doesn't have a legal team, he only has his truth. For 12 years, Elias was more than just a groundskeeper for the Sterling estate. He was the silent guardian of the property. He worked 60 hours a week, maintaining 20 acres of pristine landscape so Arthur could entertain heads of state and tech moguls. But look at Elias's posture now. He sits slightly crooked, his right shoulder noticeably lower than his left, a permanent physical signature of the tragedy Arthur Sterling tried to ignore. 6 months ago, while Elias was repairing a stone retaining wall that Arthur had refused to reinforce for years, the structure collapsed. Tons of granite pinned Elias's leg, crushing his tibia and severing nerves. The cruelty of the billionaire wasn't just in the accident, it was in the aftermath. Arthur didn't call an ambulance from his private line. Instead, his security detail escorted a bleeding Elias off the property to avoid a liability scene. Because Arthur had classified Elias as a private consultant rather than an employee, a classic billionaire tax dodge, Elias had no health insurance, no workers' comp, and 0 disability benefits. In the courtroom, Elias presented his medical bills, $185,000. He had sold his truck, his only means of independence, just to pay for the first 2 surgeries. He was facing eviction from the small apartment he had lived in for 2 decades. As Elias recounted his story, his voice cracking when he mentioned he could no longer kneel to play with his grandchildren, the camera panned to Arthur Sterling. Arthur wasn't listening. He was checking his gold-rimmed watch, his face a mask of profound boredom. His physiognomy at this moment revealed the toxicity of status, a complete inability to recognize Elias as a living, breathing human being with a nervous system capable of feeling pain. When Elias finished his testimony, Arthur didn't offer a look of sympathy. He leaned over to his lead attorney and whispered something that made the lawyer smirk. Judge Judy saw that smirk. Her eyes, usually sharp, turned into twin lasers of judicial fury. She leaned over her bench, her voice dropping into that low, dangerous register that regular viewers know signifies the end of a bully's reign. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "you find the destruction of a man's livelihood amusing?" Arthur didn't flinch. He adjusted his silk tie and looked Judge Judy dead in the eye, a move most people would consider suicidal. "I find it a business inconvenience, Judge," he replied. The courtroom gasped. This was the moment the curtain of civility was ripped away, revealing the sociopathic heart of the elite. But the real explosion was still minutes away, hidden in a document Arthur thought had been shredded 10 years ago. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from heavy sadness to a sharp, electric tension. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the independent contractor agreement Arthur Sterling's high-priced legal team had submitted. This document was the billionaire's shield, designed to prove he owed Elias Thorne nothing. But Arthur, in his practiced arrogance, had forgotten one fundamental rule of Judge Judy's courtroom. The truth doesn't need a polished contract to survive. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Judy's voice was like a cold scalpel, "you claim here, in this signed statement, that you were not on the property on the day of the collapse. You claim you were at your corporate headquarters in Houston, correct?" Arthur adjusted his cufflinks, a classic tell of someone attempting to maintain a dominant posture while under pressure. "That is correct, Judge. My flight logs and my executive assistant can verify my location. I was closing a 9-figure merger. I have better things to do than watch a gardener move rocks." The insult to Elias was palpable, but Judge Judy didn't react to the jab. Instead, she reached into a blue folder, the vault of facts. She pulled out a single, high-resolution photograph. "Then explain this, Mr. Sterling. This is a time-stamped image from a neighbor's security camera taken exactly 10 minutes after the wall collapsed. That's your black Maybach in the driveway. And if we zoom in, that's you, standing on the balcony, looking down at Mr. Thorne while he was pinned under 2 tons of stone." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the studio lights. Arthur's lead attorney turned a sickly shade of gray. Arthur himself didn't move, but his jaw tightened, the physiognomy of a predator who realized the cage door had just locked. "You didn't just ignore the accident, Mr. Sterling," Judge Judy continued, her voice rising in a crescendo of righteous authority. "You watched it happen. You watched a man who served you for 12 years bleed on your driveway, and instead of calling for help, you called your lawyers to ensure he couldn't sue you. You didn't go to Houston. You stayed to supervise the cover-up." Arthur's face flushed a deep, angry red. The curtain of civility was gone. He stood up, towering over his legal team, and pointed a finger directly at the bench. This was the moment of privilege overload. He wasn't looking at a judge anymore. He was looking at an obstacle. "I don't care about your pictures or your little local rules," Arthur bellowed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Do you have any idea the taxes I pay, the jobs I create? This court is a rounding error on my balance sheet." It was here, in the heat of his rage, that Arthur Sterling made the fatal mistake that would trend globally for weeks. He leaned over the rail, his eyes bulging with a mix of ego and desperation, and hissed the words that would trigger his total annihilation. "I don't need to follow your rules. If I want, I'll just buy this courtroom and everyone in it." The audience didn't just gasp, they recoiled. It was the ultimate mask-off moment. Arthur had just admitted that to him. Everything truth, pain, and justice was a commodity. But he had no idea that Judge Judy was about to show him a price tag he couldn't afford. When Arthur Sterling uttered the words, "I'll just buy this courtroom," he didn't just insult Judge Judy, he committed social suicide on a global stage. What followed was not a shouting match. It was something much more terrifying. It was the 8 seconds of silence. In those 8 seconds, the air left the room. The camera operators froze. The bailiff's hand moved instinctively toward his belt. Judge Judy didn't yell. She didn't bang her gavel. She simply leaned back, her hands folded, and stared at Arthur with a look of profound clinical pity. It was the look a scientist gives a specimen that has just self-destructed under a microscope. Look at Arthur's face during this silence. The flush of anger begins to turn into the pale gray of realization. The physiognomy of regret starts at the jawline. His eyes, once searching for a way to dominate, now look for an exit. But there are no exits in this courtroom. Mr. Sterling, Judge Judy finally whispered, her voice carrying more weight than a scream. You are laboring under the delusion that your bank account is a substitute for your soul. You think you can buy this courtroom? You can't even buy back the respect of the people watching you right now. But the takedown wasn't just verbal, it was economic. Judge Judy reached for a second, thicker file, the financial autopsy. You mentioned your merger earlier, the one you were supposedly attending in Houston? My researchers spent the last hour looking into Sterling Energy's recent filings. It seems your merger is actually a desperate attempt to cover a $400 million hole in your offshore accounts money that was supposed to be in the employee pension fund. Money that belonged to people like Elias Thorne. The courtroom erupted. The audience didn't just cheer, they screamed for justice. Arthur's lead attorney literally packed his briefcase and stepped away from his client. The billionaire was now standing alone, a king without a kingdom. You came here to avoid paying a groundskeeper's medical bills, Judge Judy thundered, her voice now a force of nature. But you've just alerted the SEC, the Department of Labor, and your board of directors to your fraud. By trying to buy this court, you've just sold your entire empire for a $1,000 fine and a one-way ticket to federal court. Arthur Sterling's knees hit the chair. The man who walked in as a titan was now a hollow shell. This is the annihilation of the ego, the exact moment when the viewer at home feels the surge of dopamine because the bully isn't just stopped, he is erased. The courtroom was still vibrating from the shock of Arthur Sterling's outburst, but Judge Judy was already 3 steps ahead. She didn't just want to punish him for his arrogance. She wanted to expose the foundation of his empire. She reached for a third file, a manila folder, yellowed with age, retrieved from the deep archives of the SEC. Mr. Sterling, Judge Judy began, her voice steady and clinical. You stand here today pretending to be a pillar of the community. You talk about the jobs you create and the taxes you pay. But let's look at the man before the billions. Let's look at Arthur Sterling in 1998, back when you were running a small investment firm in Florida. Look at Arthur's face now. This is the physiognomy of a cornered predator. The arrogance has vanished, replaced by a twitch in the left eyelid, a classic biological indicator of a suppressed fight or flight response. He knows exactly what is in that folder. In 1998, Judge Judy continued, you were investigated for a Ponzi-style scheme targeting retired teachers. You settled out of court, paid a fine, and changed your company name. You didn't build your wealth through innovation, Mr. Sterling. You built it by stealing the dignity of people just like Elias Thorne. You've been doing this for 30 years? Elias wasn't just a groundskeeper to you. He was just another line item in a life built on exploitation. The audience was breathless. This is the moral pivot, the moment where the case transforms from a simple injury claim into a grand reckoning for a lifetime of sin. Judge Judy turned to Arthur's legal team. And you? You high-priced mercenaries? You knew. You checked his background. You helped him classify Elias as an independent contractor to shield a man who has been shielding himself from accountability since the 90s. The lead attorney looked down at the floor. The social execution was complete. But then came the final blow, the one that hit Arthur where it hurt most, his legacy. Elias Thorne isn't just asking for medical bills, Judge Judy declared. He's asking for the truth. And the truth is, you are a fraud in a $4,000 suit. I am not just ruling on this case. I am forwarding this entire file, including your by the court threat, to the State Attorney General's office for a full audit of your pension fund. Arthur Sterling didn't shout this time. He couldn't. He looked at Elias, the man he had ignored for 12 years, and for the first time, there was a flicker of genuine terror in his eyes. He realized that in his attempt to save a few $1,000s, he had just invited the government to dismantle his multi-billion-dollar house of cards. Judge Judy didn't wait for Arthur Sterling's lawyers to offer another hollow objection. She had seen enough. The mask of power had not just slipped, it had been incinerated. She gripped her gavel, but before she struck the bench, she looked at Elias Thorne, the man who had spent the last 6 months wondering if his life was over. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice softening for the first time, you spent 12 years building someone else's empire. You gave your sweat, your labor, and nearly your life to a man who didn't even have the decency to call an ambulance. In this courtroom, you are not a private consultant. You are a human being who was wronged. Then, she turned her laser focus back to Arthur Sterling. The billionaire was now slumped in his chair, his $4,000 suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The physiognomy of defeat was complete. The hollowed eyes, the trembling hands, the sudden loss of that practiced, arrogant posture. He was no longer a CEO. He was a defendant who had just realized that money is a useless shield against the truth. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $10,000, the maximum this court allows, Judge Judy thundered. But Mr. Sterling, do not think for a second that this is over. I am finding you in contempt of court for your attempt to intimidate and buy this bench. That is a criminal offense. I am ordering the bailiff to take you into custody immediately. You will spend the next 48 hours in a holding cell while the state attorney general begins the audit of your fraudulent pension fund. The sound of the gavel hitting the wood was like a gunshot. It didn't just end the case. It ended Arthur Sterling's life as he knew it. The bailiff stepped forward, his handcuffs clicking a sound that, for the billionaire, must have felt like the closing of a tomb. Arthur looked around the room, searching for his legal team, but they had already moved away, distancing themselves from the radioactive wreckage of his reputation. You thought you could buy this courtroom, Judge Judy said, as Arthur was led away in cuffs. Instead, you just bought yourself a legacy of shame. You came in here a billionaire, but you're leaving here a common criminal. Take him out. As Arthur was led through the back door, the courtroom audience erupted into a standing ovation. This was the justice high, the moment the viewer at home feels a profound sense of relief. But the story isn't just about the billionaire's fall, it's about Elias's rise. As the noise faded, Elias Thorne put his head in his hands and wept. Not out of sadness, but out of the sheer weight of being seen for the first time in 12 years. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered with a vengeance. While Arthur Sterling sat in a cold holding cell, stripped of his Patek Philippe and his bespoke suit, the world outside was witnessing the fastest corporate decapitation in history. The video of him shouting, "I'll buy this courtroom," didn't just go viral, it became a global anthem for the end of corporate greed. Within 6 hours of the episode airing, Sterling Energy's stock price plummeted by 34%, wiping out nearly $1.4 billion in market value in a single afternoon. This is the economic domino effect, where one man's ego destroys thousands of people's investments. Look at the screens of every major news outlet. They aren't talking about his mergers anymore. They are playing the 8-second clip of his stunned silence on a loop. The physiognomy of a fallen king was being analyzed by every body language expert from New York to London. His untouchable status had evaporated. By midnight, the Sterling Energy Board of Directors held an emergency session. They didn't just fire Arthur, they stripped him of his stock options, citing the morality clause he had once used to fire junior employees. But the fallout was more than just financial. Arthur's social circle, the governors, the billionaires, the friends he had bought with expensive galas disappeared like smoke. His name was scrubbed from the wings of museums and the boards of charities. He became radioactive. No one wanted to be associated with the man who tried to buy a judge to avoid paying a gardener. And then, the most devastating blow, the SEC audit Judge Judy triggered. They didn't just find the $400 million hole in the pension fund. They found a paper trail of 30 years of systematic theft. Arthur Sterling wasn't just a bad boss, he was a career predator. His wife filed for divorce the next morning, citing total betrayal, and requested that his name be legally removed from their children's trust funds to protect them from the fallout. Arthur Sterling entered that courtroom thinking he was a god who could negotiate with gravity. He left it as a cautionary tale, a man who spent his whole life building a mountain of gold, only to realize he had built it on a foundation of sand. The legacy he spent 40 years cultivating was dismantled in exactly 48 hours. This is the finality of justice. It proves that when you treat people like Elias Thorne as disposable, you eventually become disposable yourself. Arthur Sterling's name has become a footnote in a legal textbook on corporate fraud. But for Elias Thorne, the story is just beginning. Justice, in Judge Judy's courtroom, is never just about the money. It's about the restoration of the soul. Elias didn't just walk away with a settlement. He walked away with his head held high for the first time in a decade. Look at Elias now, 6 months after the trial. He is no longer sitting in a cramped apartment, staring at medical bills he can't pay. Thanks to the $500,000 trust fund established in the wake of the Sterling Energy collapse, Elias has received the best physical therapy in the country. He walks with a cane now, not a walker, a physical manifestation of his regained independence, the ultimate emotional trigger for our audience. He has moved into a small, sun-drenched house near his grandchildren. The man who was once disposable is now the heart of his family. But there is a final, chilling lesson here for all of us. Arthur Sterling's downfall wasn't caused by a lawyer or a competitor. It was caused by his own belief that he was the exception to the human contract. He looked at a man like Elias and saw a tool, not a neighbor. He looked at a courtroom and saw a marketplace. This is the moral echo, the realization that power without empathy is simply a slow-motion tragedy waiting to happen. Do you see the change in the world since this case aired? It's a reminder that no matter how many billions you have, you cannot buy the one thing that truly matters: your character. In a world that often feels like it's run by the Arthur Sterlings, Judge Judy reminded us that the Elias Thornes are the ones who truly hold the world together. This is why we tell these stories. We tell them to remind the powerful that they are watched, and to remind the hardworking that they are seen. If you believe that a man's character is his true currency, not his bank account, then you belong here with us. Smash that like button to stand with Elias and every hardworking soul who has ever been stepped on by an elite bully. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because in this community, we don't just watch drama, we witness the triumph of the human spirit over the delusion of power. Your support ensures that stories like this reach the millions who need to know that justice isn't a myth. It's a reality, and it starts with you. Thank you for watching, and remember, never let anyone tell you that you are too small to demand the truth.